What if I told you there was once a king so powerful, so strategic, that he conquered empires, not just with swords, but with ideas? A king who rose from a forgotten corner of Persia and built the largest empire the world had ever seen, long before Rome or Alexander. His name struck fear into kings and inspired philosophers centuries later. This is not a myth. This is the real story of Cyrus the Great, the man who made even Europe tremble from afar. Long before Europe dreamed of empires, before Caesar crossed the Rubicon or Alexander crossed into Asia, there lived a Persian king who reshaped the entire world. His empire stretched from the edge of India to the shores of the Aegean Sea. But Cyrus was not just a conqueror, he was a revolutionary. His rise wasn't born out of sheer violence or cruelty, but through calculated brilliance, clever diplomacy, and a deep sense of justice that even his enemies admired. While Europe was still fractured into small tribes and kingdoms, news began to spread westward of a man who defeated mighty kings, liberated ancient cities, and united diverse peoples under a banner of tolerance. This is how Cyrus rose from a tribal nobody to a world-changing emperor. Cyrus's story starts not in a royal palace, but in the rugged hills of Anshan, a small region in present-day Iran. Born to a noble but minor family, Cyrus was heir to a people long dominated by the Medes, a powerful empire that held many tribes under its iron grip. For most, this would have meant submission, but for Cyrus, it became his first battlefield. The Medes were confident in their rule, but they underestimated the quiet strength rising within their own vassals. Young Cyrus was not just a warrior, he was a listener, a strategist, and above all, a unifier. He carefully studied the weaknesses of the Median kingdom, forging silent alliances among discontented tribal leaders. He saw what the Median king Astyages could not, that power based on fear was fragile. The final spark came when Cyrus's own grandfather, yes, Astyages himself, feared a prophecy that the young prince would overthrow him. In an ironic twist of fate, the very attempt to suppress Cyrus only fueled the rebellion. Cyrus took up arms, but he didn't start a chaotic war, he launched a revolution, one that would soon consume the very throne that had oppressed his people. The real genius of Cyrus wasn't just in winning battles, it was in avoiding them. As he marched toward the Median capital, he didn't rely solely on brute strength. He used a weapon far more effective than swords: persuasion. Cyrus secretly reached out to Median generals, whispering promises of fair rule, shared power, and respect, something they hadn't known under Astyages' paranoid reign. One of the most critical betrayals came from Harpagus, a high-ranking Median commander who had long held a grudge against Astyages. Harpagus not only refused to fight Cyrus, he actively helped turn the Median army against their own king. By the time Cyrus reached the capital, much of the army had either defected or surrendered. The Medes expected war, but what they got was a peaceful handover of power. The Persian banner rose, not in bloodshed, but through a stunning political takeover. Cyrus hadn't just defeated an empire, he had absorbed it. This moment changed everything. Cyrus now had the loyalty of the Medes, the prestige of victory, and the foundation for something far bigger than a rebellion. He was no longer just a tribal prince. He was now the ruler of two great peoples, Persians and Medes. The empire had begun. With the Medes now part of his growing empire, Cyrus set his sights on his next target: Lydia, a kingdom of immense wealth and pride, located in modern-day Turkey. Its king Croesus was famed across the known world for his gold, his arrogance, and his foolish trust in fate. Croesus, confident in his alliances and wealth, challenged Cyrus and marched east, but Cyrus was already prepared. Instead of charging into traps, he lured Croesus deep into Persian territory, stretching his army thin. Then, with calculated precision, Cyrus struck back. The final blow came at the Battle of Thymbra. Despite being outnumbered, Cyrus employed brilliant tactics, including using camel riders to terrify the Lydian cavalry, a trick that broke the enemy's strongest force. Croesus fled to his capital, Sardis, believing it could withstand any siege. But Cyrus wasn't going to wait. In just 2 weeks, Sardis fell. The gates opened, and with it, one of the richest kingdoms in the world collapsed into Persian hands. Croesus, once the wealthiest man in the world, now stood before the conqueror he had underestimated. With Lydia added to his empire, Cyrus now controlled a vast portion of Asia Minor. His reach had extended to the very edges of Europe, and kings in the West began to take notice. He wasn't just rising, he was unstoppable. By now, Cyrus was not just a rising emperor, he was a force of nature. 2 great kingdoms had already fallen under his rule, yet he was far from finished. His eyes turned southward, toward one of the most ancient and legendary cities in the world, Babylon. Babylon was not just a city, it was a symbol of power, knowledge, and invincibility. Its walls were so thick that it was said chariots could ride along their tops side by side. Its empire was vast, its culture refined, and its people proud. To attack Babylon was to challenge history itself. But Cyrus knew something the outside world didn't. Babylon was cracking from within. The people were tired of their king Nabonidus, who had alienated the priesthood, ignored the ancient traditions, and ruled with arrogance. Rather than storming Babylon with brute force, Cyrus chose a different path, one rooted in clever timing, patience, and psychological warfare. His armies dammed the Euphrates River, which flowed through the city, and under the cover of night, his troops waded through the lowered waters and entered Babylon through its river gates, and unaware. There was no massacre, no destruction, no burning of temples. Instead, Cyrus issued a declaration that stunned the world. He freed the enslaved, restored stolen idols to their native temples, and honored the local gods. He didn't just conquer Babylon, he was welcomed by it. For the first time, an invader was hailed as a hero. Cyrus became known not just as a conqueror, but as the liberator of Babylon. Even the city's powerful priesthood embraced him as a rightful ruler. It was a masterclass in soft power. With Babylon under his control, Cyrus's empire exploded in size. It now stretched thousands of miles from the Indus Valley in the east to the Aegean Sea in the west. No empire in human history had ever controlled such a vast and diverse stretch of land. From Central Asia's deserts to the rich cities of Mesopotamia, from the rugged mountains of Persia to the coasts of the Mediterranean, Cyrus ruled them all. His governance was not built on fear, but on respect for customs, languages, and religions. Local kings were allowed to stay in power as long as they pledged loyalty. Citizens were free to worship in their own temples. Trade flourished, roads were built, and stability became the heartbeat of this growing superpower. But not everyone felt at ease. To the west, across the Aegean Sea, the city-states of Greece watched with growing anxiety. Athens, Sparta, and others knew that the shadow stretching toward them was no ordinary storm. It was the shadow of a king who had never lost a war. Cyrus didn't need to invade them to send a message. His empire was now their neighbor, and fear alone was beginning to shake the foundations of Europe's ancient world. In just under 3 decades, Cyrus had gone from a forgotten prince to the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. But it wasn't just his military victories that made him feared, it was the way he rewrote the very idea of kingship. He didn't slaughter the conquered, he protected them. He didn't erase cultures, he preserved them. His power came not just from armies, but from ideals, and that was far more dangerous to traditional kings than any sword. He offered an empire where justice, tolerance, and strategy outshone brutality. For the rulers of Europe and the Western world, this was both terrifying and revolutionary. To them, Cyrus wasn't simply expanding territory, he was redefining how empires were built. He made kings look obsolete, he made warlords look primitive, and even after his death, his name would echo through the ages. In fact, centuries later, another young conqueror named Alexander would visit Cyrus's tomb in silence, honoring a man he saw not as a rival but as the one true king of kings. Cyrus the Great was not just a king, he was a phenomenon. He rose from obscurity, toppled mighty empires, and created a world order that stood centuries ahead of its time. He mastered the art of war, but even more impressively, he mastered the art of peace. He conquered cities without fire, ruled lands without fear, and earned loyalty through justice rather than terror. While the kings of Europe ruled over fragments, Cyrus stitched together a mosaic of cultures into a single empire that worked because he understood people. He didn't try to crush their identities, he elevated them. And that's what made him so dangerous to the old world powers, because he proved there was a different way to lead, a way that worked better, a way that lasted longer. Long after his death, his shadow lingered across continents. He became a model for rulers, admired even by those who feared him. His name was etched into clay, carved into stone, and whispered in the courts of Europe as a symbol of ultimate power. And though time has buried many kings, Cyrus still rises in stories, in memory, and in the foundations of the empires that followed. He wasn't just feared, he was immortalized.